Welcome to the party. I'm Sam Ekstrom of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Danielle Hunter always was in the building, but now Danielle Hunter is in the building.
Hey, this is Arif Hassan with Pro Football Network. I just learned that Sam and Luke only just found out about Immaculate Grid, making my intro from last week pointless.
Luke Inman at Luke_Spinman. Hey, saw Justin Jefferson rocking those 99 Club Madden cleats out practice. Makes me wonder, what's Sam Ekstrom's rating after his official combine workout?
A 2.
Locked On Sports Minnesota podcast. It's endless Minnesota Vikings talk with the diverse voices of your local experts. It's time for the Minnesota Football Party. It's your guys hanging out talking next level Vikings football. So join in with Pro Football Network's Arif Hassan, Locked On Vikings Luke Braun, Superior Sports Talk's Luke Inman, and Vikings insider Sam Ekstrom, plus the biggest names in Minnesota football for the Minnesota Football Party. And it starts now.
Welcome in a new week on the Minnesota Football Party here on Locked On Sports Minnesota. I'm Sam Ekstrom. Follow me on Twitter at Sam Ekstrom. Joined today on this Monday by Luke Inman, NFL Draft Buzz newsletter author. He's at Luke_Spinman on Twitter. And Arif Hassan, Pro Football Network at Arif Hassan NFL on Twitter. We are Luke Braunless today as he travels from California, getting through those Rocky Mountains, into the Midwest, landing in the Twin Cities, so he too can attend the invigorating Minnesota Vikings training camp where Danielle Hunter is now present. He signs a restructured one-year deal over the weekend, easily the top story heading into the week as the Vikings hit the practice field again today after a day off. We'll also have full training camp takeaways, all empty my notebook from what I've seen the first 4 days of camp. We'll talk about some surprises at cornerback, including Jawan Williams' presence being made known, and maybe a little kicker competition talk to end the show. But Luke Inman, we'll kick it off with you, my man. Danielle Hunter, yesterday morning, agrees to a restructured deal with the Vikings, 17 guaranteed, $20 million total. Your thoughts on Danielle officially being back in purple?
Well, let's let out that big collective sigh of relief, finally. Once and for all. I think Hunter, obviously, he probably wanted a long-term deal, right? More security. But Kwesi, man, just continues to dish out these baby deals. He will not commit to anyone long-term more than what? What's the longest we've seen? 3 years? I'm sure once we get into the J.J. Hawkinson, Darisaw extensions, we'll finally see something longer than 3 years. But I think it's about as close of a win-win as you can probably get for both sides. Hunter finally gets about a 400% pay bump, gets some incentives thrown in as well, up to $20 million. And if he balls out and if he stays healthy, then, I mean, he's due. He's in for a massive deal next year with somebody, whether it's the Vikings or not. And just knowing kind of the going rate now, too, after studying all this and getting deep in the weeds with these edge rushers, if he puts up a normal Danielle Hunter season in 2023, he's probably looking at a 3-year, $80 million deal with somebody. Through the Vikings lens, you get to keep one of your best players at arguably one of the biggest positions of needs, most valuable positions in the game right now, just in general. That's edge rusher. I think it was last Wednesday, Sam, the mailbag show with Reggie Wilson. I talked about Kwesi kind of shedding some more light on what this competitive rebuild actually means. And he really made it sound like, okay, the objective here is to always have a roster at its floor that can still sneak into the playoffs. Because once you're in, you never know what can happen. So maybe you don't have that Super Bowl roster and window every so often, but you don't have to endure the 3-13 seasons after you strip it down to the studs. Whether you agree with that philosophy or not, if that's your game plan and mindset, it's really hard to sell the fan base when you don't retain some of your best core players. And I just thought it was going to be so important if you realistically thought Flores was going to be able to drastically improve this defense at all, or even just get it up to middle of the pack, then you got to give him some talent to work with. And we've kind of talked about it all offseason the past 3-4 months. He had a great season very quietly. Double-digit sacks, top 10 in pressures, playing a new position for the first time, wasn't really being used properly in certain areas. Let's be real here. No disrespect to guys like Wanham and Patrick Jones, but you already lost Za'Darius Smith, and now you're talking about losing potentially 2 top 10 edge rushers in one offseason and getting better on defense. That's a tough sell to the fan base. The drop-off in talent from Hunter to the next guys was so big. The contrast was so huge that I don't know if it would have been realistic to expect anything but another below average performance from that defense, whether it was Ed Donatel or Brian Flores calling the shots. I think it was on Friday's practice. I watched some Vikings highlights up on Viking.com. Mm-hmm. They had a clip where Luigi Villain was running with the ones. He was with the first team. And I mean, again, good on him, but you're talking about a UDFA from last year being forced to take some reps with the starters simply because you're starting to run out of bodies back there. But I know you got the whole youth movement going on, but you still got at least one key veteran at each level of defense now with Danielle Hunter on the D-line. You got Jordan Hicks at linebacker, Harrison Smith in the secondary. And I just think it puts them in a really good position to still retain Danielle Hunter next year if you see him as part of the long-term plans after you sign JJ and Hawkinson to those extensions, hopefully by next offseason. So, yeah, all in all, I think it was a big win-win and a good job of Kwesi to at least get Danielle back in purple for at least one more season. By the way, did you see a little good cop, bad cop going on with Kwesi and KOC? Because every time I heard KOC get asked about Danielle Hunter up at the podium, and Sam, you've been there all week, it just sounded like he was always team Danielle Hunter. Like he always made you feel good about the communication that was going on behind the scenes, while Kwesi, I'm sure, had to be the bad guy and be the penny pincher.
Yeah. KOC was more, I'd say, optimistic in his tone. And Kwesi, I think, got really put on the spot by a Kevin Seifert question, who asked him very directly, will Danielle be on the team? Kwesi, not wanting to overcommit, had to dodge that, and he sounded kind of evasive in doing so. But Arif, let me lead into you with this. We're brought to you by FanDuel on this show. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more. FanDuel.com/lockedon. You know who was ready to punch the under on the Vikings win total if Danielle Hunter left? Luke Braun. Luke Braun was jumping off the cliff if Danielle Hunter was off this team. I think he's on record saying that they're
well, now I've changed my mind. Now I think the extension's a bad idea.
He said... You're thrilled, too, that he's gone today, aren't you? He thought this was a 6-win operation without Danielle Hunter. And now that Danielle is back, Luke Braun can actually, hold his head up high wearing that Vikings shirt at practice today. But, Arif, it felt like Saturday was sort of the last call because there was the leak about Danielle Hunter being available via trade. Maybe they got a couple calls. Third round pick. Hey, doesn't meet our threshold. We're going to hang on to him. Do you think that's how it went down here? Or how did you interpret the events leading up to this? And then obviously, what do you make of the final resolution?
Yeah, I don't know how much of an impact the leak of the trade rumors had, but like very clearly, I think it was part of the negotiating strategy that the Vikings had. So like, whether or not it changed things, I think that it was just kind of like we saw part of the process play out in that respect. I'm a little bit surprised that they didn't work out a long-term deal because I think both sides do want a long-term deal, but obviously they have disagreements over what that would look like. I think that for a player with the injury history of someone like Hunter, it's very clear that something like guarantees would play a very big role in what any long-term extension would look like, right? Like somebody like Hunter probably wants more guaranteed money because I think that the lack of guaranteed money in his previous contract, especially as he, started missing games, was a big problem for him. And then, the Vikings obviously don't want to commit to a player that they don't know whether or not he'll be available in the form of guaranteed money. And also when you provide guaranteed money, that is just much more difficult to move around. And so you end up with a more static, inflexible contract that makes it much more difficult for you to do all of the cap mechanics and magic that we actually saw the Vikings do this season. They're currently $18 million, or they were right before the Danielle Hunter signing. They were currently $18 million in the cap. And remember, people were freaking, including us, we're talking about like, oh my God, they're $50 million over the cap. Well, they're, 18 million under, probably 10 million under now because of the extension. But like all of those changing cap dynamics as a result of, how flexible they've created these contracts. Some of that has to do with the fact that it's not all in signing bonus right away. You can change things. So I think that was, and we'll see, like Luke said, by the end of the year, the Vikings might be able to work out a long-term deal with Hunter, see what that looks like. Maybe, he has to demonstrate that he can string together a bunch of games, just not in terms of performance, although that's obviously key, but in terms of health, just being available for a bunch of games before the Vikings were saying, hey, maybe it seems unlikely that, the pectoral tear has like this persistent injury that's going to result in having lost games. We're going to finally be able to figure out, if he has, the durability that we need. It's really, like Luke said, hey, 2 top 10 edge rushers. That's really important to emphasize. Danielle was 6th in the NFL last year in total pressures during the regular season. And he's a top tier run defender, right? I mean, that's what he was. That was his primary role. And then he became, this extraordinary pass rusher on top of it. What are you going to do without him? Probably not much. So yeah, I think that, it's nice that they have him available for the season. I don't know if I'd call it a win-win. I think that both sides wanted a longer deal, but I wouldn't call it a lose-lose either.
Arif brings up a quick, great point here, Sam. Arguably, one of the more underrated run defenders at that position still in the entire NFL. People think Danielle Hunter, they think pass rusher. He's always, right out the gate coming up from LSU, been really, really good, really strong in run support as well. And I think that flies under the radar a little bit, just how much of a complete player he is at that edge rusher position.
How big is this, though, for Marcus Davenport? Because the trickle-down effect is now that Danielle is suddenly the number 1 threat off the edge. He takes up most of the attention. And now Marcus Davenport, who might have been overmatched as such an obvious number 1, now gets to be that number 2, which I think is gigantic for Marcus Davenport, who's got immense pressure. He's being asked to do more this year in terms of workload. He's working inside. He's working outside. There's a lot on his plate. And now just a little less on his plate. Now that Danielle Hunter is on the other side, he gets to come in and I think be a nice fit here with Brian Flores. But suddenly the 0 and 99 dynamic on the edges looks a little more formidable than the 0 and 98 dynamic with DJ Wanham in there, all due respect. But yeah, it wasn't looking good. I mean, Luke, this elevates everybody, I think, in that rotation now where they're in the proper spot in the pecking order instead of trying to play kind of out of their realm.
Everybody obviously is going to look right at the front 7 right away. How about the secondary? Oh my gosh, they're going to be running that man coverage scheme quite a bit. The difference between covering a guy for 2.5 seconds versus 3.5 seconds doesn't sound like a lot. It's huge in the NFL. And I think having that edge rusher that can give you consistent pass rush, especially on a 3rd down, 3rd and long situations for Brian Flores to feel comfortable and confident to be able to dial up some of these exotic blitzes and looks. I think that's going to be a huge piece to the Brian Flores puzzle that we're all still kind of waiting to unfold here a little bit. We're seeing a little bit of bits and pieces here at practice, but I don't think until maybe, a quarter of the way into the season will we really understand not only what Brian Flores is trying to do here, but what he's trying to do with these specific pieces that he has to work with. And Danielle Hunter, as you mentioned, is going to be a huge piece of that puzzle.
Yeah, who's upset, Arif, potentially at this news? It's the Luigi Villains, the Patrick Joneses, the DJ Wanhams. One of them might be cut because of this, because of the trickle-down effect that it has on the roster, but also their playing time is impacted. Good for the Vikings from a depth perspective, though, now that you don't have your first guy off the bench being Luigi Villain. I mean, there is a domino effect here that looks a lot better on paper.
Yeah, I mean, just wait for Andre Carter to come off the NFI list, and then we can talk about how great that depth is, right? I think the knock-on effects of Hunter, like we talk a lot when we talk about players about the individual impact that they have. Hunter has so many pressures, all of that. But, the ability for the Vikings to field a more fully capable edge rusher unit, the fact that they probably won't have to rely on, shadow depth, which is depth from other positions, somebody like maybe an Ivan Pace from linebacker or somebody like a James Lynch or an Asezia Temewo at defensive end, not the edge rusher position in the current Vikings defense, but people who have played edge rusher positions before in college that might want to switch outside in the same way that Ifeadi Odenigbo did, for the Vikings a couple of years ago. You don't have to rely on that. You don't have to make a choice between, do I want to play Luigi Villain or do I want to play Odenigbo, right? And the knock-on effects are even bigger than that, right? Because when you have your third down package ready, obviously the Vikings are going to blitz a lot more often, so the dynamic is a little bit different than last year. But let's take last year, for example. You had somebody like Za'Darius Smith kind of lining up on the inside. He ended up taking on a fair amount of double teams, which unleashed Danielle Hunter because of the way Za'Darius Smith would line up. Now, the Vikings probably won't move Danielle Hunter around. They might move Marcus Davenport around. You could have a similar effect. But what's really important here is to think about what happened with Marcus Davenport in New Orleans, which was that he was double teamed much more often than Cameron Jordan, right? So, which I find really fascinating, right? Because people kind of perceive Cameron Jordan to be the star edge rusher there. Marcus Davenport is kind of the disappointing first round sort of bust that they've had. He wasn't able to produce, but he was double teamed a lot more often. Some of that's because of his versatility to play inside, just like Za'Darius Smith, but some of that's just because he was probably the more talented player there. And we saw kind of what the end result was that, if he's double teamed more often, his pressure rate wasn't awful or anything like that, but it wasn't phenomenal. And obviously, everyone knows about the sack rate. Now that he gets to be kind of the secondary guy, now that we get to see, kind of players like Ivan Pace, players like Luigi Villain, people like DJ Wonnum be put into their most optimal roles, right? Like a third down pass rusher, we'll get to see kind of better and more efficient production from the rest of that roster because of Hunter's gravity and presence.
Yeah, and again, we talk about Kwesi buying the dip. Marcus Davenport was top 10 in pass rush productivity 2 years ago. So the bet is that, okay, if he can get back to that, and we have Danielle, we might be in a pretty good spot.
There's a lot of players the Vikings signed that were good 2 years ago.
That is the Kwesi,
Darius, Dean
the
Lowry.
Kwesi special. That's for sure. Extended FanDuel time here. They've got a prop, Danielle Hunter to record 10 plus sacks in the regular season. Guess the line. What do you think, Luke? What do you think the odds are on that?
The over-under, what the line is
Just
on
the
sacks?
Well,
the money line. The money line on 10 plus sacks. What do you think?
I think that would be minus 130.
I was going to go minus 130 as well. Screw it. It just for something different, minus 140.
You guys know your stuff. Minus 125. Can't get any closer than that guess. Danielle Hunter, minus 125 to record 10 plus sacks.
So question is, are you guys taking the over? Are you guys hitting it?
I mean, I think
we feel good about it.
We both basically said you probably should, right?
Probably should.
I mean, this is not gambling advice, but you probably should.
No, but they are giving away free money, basically.
Yeah, but also
I'm looking at all the Vikings prop specials. Vikings to score 1+ touchdown in every regular season game. Vikings to beat the Packers on the road and at home. Jordan Addison to score 10 receiving touchdowns. That's all.
Well, what are the
FanDuel.
lines on these first two? You got my antennas up here, Sam.
All right. Well, we'll get to that after I finish telling you more about FanDuel. Betting NFL, MLB, futures on every league. It's every line. It's every league. It's FanDuel. It's all there. New customers can get up to 10 times their initial bet in bonus bets back. So you put 20 on the Danielle Hunter prop, you get 200. Whether it wins or loses, you get 200. That's the promotion going on at FanDuel. Many great promotions there all the time. No better place to wager on baseball than FanDuel. Full slate of games tonight. No Minnesota Twins. That's okay. There's run lines. There's money lines on that as well. It's America's #1 sportsbook. It's FanDuel.com/LockedOn, FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Get those $200 free in bonus bets, whether you win or lose, and bet baseball or NFL futures at FanDuel. They're an official partner, by the way, of Major League Baseball. So here are the lines on those props I alluded to. Vikings to score a touchdown in every game, even money, plus 100. Was there a game last year where they didn't? Eagles, they did. Packers, they did.
Cowboys game.
40-3.
Yep.
All it takes is one.
All it takes is one.
Yeah, I mean, we should have remembered from the Netflix documentary, right? That was the one that broke Kirk Cousins' streak.
That's right.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Addison to score 10 TDs,
No.
plus 340.
That's
plus
aggressive. Well, plus 340.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, JJ, and obviously TDs are super hit and miss in fantasy year after year, but JJ, for whatever reason, didn't catch a ton of TDs, given how much receptions and targets and yardage he had. Maybe he could hit double digits. I wouldn't bet that, though. I probably wouldn't touch that one. Plus 340,
from a yards to touchdown ratio, because generally players regress to 100 yards per touchdown. I think I mentioned this on the show before. That's just like generally been true. It's just kind of convenient. That also happens to be the length of the field. Only one player in NFL history did not. That's Rob Gronkowski. He averaged 80 over 100. And then, I think historically we can say like Julio on the other side of it, Julio Jones wasn't. But Jefferson has not hit in any of his 3 years a touchdown for every 100 yards. It might be kind of the one area of his game that's just a little bit less developed. He might just not be the kind of red zone receiver that Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs were, which could create opportunities for somebody like a Jordan Addison, who, we tend to think of red zone receivers as like your Eric Deckers and your Brandon Marshalls and, these guys that have the ability to just go up and get it and are like enormous humans that can box out. But Adam Thielen was a very, very good red zone receiver, right? And so, it's a spacing thing. In fact, Decker won more because of his ability to create space in the red zone than it was his size. So if Addison has kind of the same red zone instincts that like Diggs and Thielen had, you might end up with that. But I think that is a pretty optimistic projection. When you've got a 2 tight end offense now, I think that there's just going to be more targets funneled to people like Hawkinson and Oliver. So I would find it tough, especially because now there's going to be more run attempts near the 5. So I'd find it tough to give Addison 10. 340 though. That's
Jefferson though. To have 15 is plus 900.
15 touchdowns? Like
wow.
That it's a lot. I mean, 900 is tempting, but no, I'm not touching that.
Yeah.
Madison, you said they're going to run inside the 5. You said that right. Madison to score 15 touchdowns, 15 rushing touchdowns. Plus 1,900.
1,900. I mean 50.
I would rather put my money on the Jefferson at 9 than that one.
Yeah, that one's rough.
If it was rushing and receiving,
roster, right?
Even though we don't forecast him to be a monster third down guy, but
I could see Madison getting like two receiving touchdowns. That would help out that kind of total.
Yep.
Cousins to score 5 rushing touchdowns.
What's that?
Plus 2,000.
I mean, he scored 3 or 4 1 year in Washington, right?
Last year, I think he had 2.
Yeah, last year.
I mean, he's been running a little bit more, enough that Kevin O'Connell was pretty surprised. Man, I don't like any of these.
We're getting way out there.
These are the sucker bets. Two more on the list. Vikings to sweep the NFC North, plus 2,400.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd take that.
It's not a bad bet. Obviously the two tough road games. Soldier Field also really a third tough road game.
Well,
it's
and
tough.
The fact that the tough ones are Detroit, right? At the end of the day, like, can we win both versus Detroit? But the fact that it's at the end of the year, you never know what can happen in a long gauntlet season in the NFL. Who knows? Maybe, they're forced to try out Hendon Hooker by the end of the year. Jared Goff's on the IR.
I can't trust Jared Goff, man. That's my issue. The Lions have a phenomenal roster. Great roster. Yes. I just can't trust Jared Goff.
Yeah.
160 to 1. Longest shot on the board. Vikings to score 1 rushing touchdown in every regular season game.
Interesting.
160 to 1.
How do you not
I'd throw down like $10 on that.
Yeah. How do you not just throw $5 on that?
$5 to get 190?
Right.
Or no, to get 900, I mean.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Those props available at FanDuel. All right. Arif has to leave a bit early, but before you go, I want to ask you about Juwan Williams, because he's probably been one of the winners of week 1 of camp. First team work every day. Looks huge out there. I mean, the size of this defense with Metellus roaming around in the box, Juwan Williams roaming around, the two of them on the field together in the dime, that's a big secondary. Caleb Evans is not small either. So what do you make of Jawan Williams being at this point, starter on paper?
I think that it'll lend itself to kind of the diversity in scheme positions that the Vikings might pick, right? Because, we know that there's a heavy cover 0, cover 1 usage historically the Brian Flores defense. But when you have players like a Caleb Evans and Jawan Williams, you really kind of want them to stay on the outside a lot of the times on a lot of snaps, in which case you maybe don't necessarily want cover 1 when players are running like crossing routes inside. It could be kind of a pickup from the cover 3 stuff that we're used to seeing from the previous era of NFL defenses, where they stay on the outside because it's cover 3. They play in man technique in cover 3. So it's more, I guess, Seattle style than Carolina style, or more and less Zimmer style, to try and keep them on the outside, while still enabling a ton of different blitzes. So that could be a wrinkle, but I do like the idea that you've got these enormous matchup corners. The problem is, I don't recall Jawan Williams' speed. Was it like a 4.6? It wasn't super impressive. I mean, he was a second round pick, so it must not have been a 4.6 exactly. But
a second round pick under Belichick. I mean, everything out the window.
That's true. Yeah,
right,
it's crazy.
Cole
right?
Strange.
Like a Duron Harmon was like a second round pick too, right? So there are some matchup issues you have to be concerned about. I don't know, aside from Kalen Barnes, who seems more like a special teamer to me, although he wasn't phenomenal enough on special teams to consistently make rosters. And his PFF grade for Carolina's special teams weren't wonderful. But I mean, aside from him, I just don't know who the matchup guys are for when they do throw out like a Jameson Williams out there, like a speed guy that you might have to find somebody fast enough to deal with. So I love kind of the versatility and potential that having a secondary with like Byron Murphy in the slot and Jawan Williams on the outside and Caleb Evans on the outside provides you. But are you just going to be like, hey, there's a fast guy, we're suddenly going to play Andrew Booth, who we otherwise just don't trust at all? Like, is that what's going to happen?
Yeah. Is this like Luke? Is this good for Williams? Like, oh, look at this guy emerging. Or do we look at it as, well, wait, so Andrew Booth is just a 2? Like they're not even giving Booth a chance to be a first teamer, right? There's 2 sides to this coin.
Right. And Evans as well seems to be just cemented, right? Like an afterthought as well, too. I mean, 3 months ago, that was like, all right, 50-50, we'll see. But you mentioned the size. And plus, too, the fact that he comes from New England, played under this system under Belichick. Then you get the size, physically imposing. He's got that ideal size, like Arif mentioned, match up with some of the bigger alpha receivers in this. Again, you need big guys in this man coverage scheme, I think. That's what Brian Flores is really looking for. And I think about it from Flores' perspective, too. It's a total youth movement. I got so many young guys. I'm installing a completely new playbook. It's just nice to have a veteran in here who's been in the league under this playbook, no less, for his entire career. Granted, 4 years? I just think during the early goings, at least, this first week or 2 at camp, it kind of makes sense Flores is leaning on and favoring a guy that just has experience and some mileage under his belt in this scheme specifically. So you're right, though. I mean, if he's the winner, right? Everybody says Jawan Williams is the winner. I guess Booth's got to be the loser, right? And it's still early, but to see Evans and Williams now kind of supplant themselves ahead of Booth early on, it's not what you want. Certainly not great for your early second round pick from last year.
I will say Andrew Booth did pick Kirk Cousins on Saturday. Terrible throw by Kirk. It was kind of like the Buffalo pick, like where he just didn't even see the DB. There were a lot of picks thrown
covering
on Saturday.
JJ, right?
I believe it was. Yeah, Kirk was forcing it.
Blanketing JJ on that play there, right?
Really, it was a lively Saturday practice. We had 4 interceptions, 2 bombs to JJ for touchdowns. Kirk threw a 50-yard dime to him. Lewis Seen made the best play I've ever seen him make, or any safe. It was one of the best safety plays I've ever seen a safety make. Like, he crashed from a high safety position all the way to the sideline, and it was like a 3-step drop. It wasn't like a long developing route. It was a 3-step drop, quick out.
I mean, that's the thing that was most impressive about his play at Georgia, his ability, specifically the play that you're describing from a single high safety position to buzz the flat for a pick. He did that at Georgia.
Downhill
that's the thing
speed.
that was exciting, and it required a high-level understanding of what the Georgia defense was trying to do and a very high-level understanding of what offenses do based off of tendencies. And that was the kind of the football IQ stuff that Dane Brugler had complimented so much in his scouting report of Lewis Cine that it seemed very confusing in terms of why Lewis Cine wasn't seeing the field for the Vikings, because his football IQ was supposed to be the smartest player on that really impressive Georgia defense. So it's nice to see kind of elements of that appear as we're kind of wondering if he's ever going to see the field for the team.
Yeah. Arif, you got to roll. Have a good rest of your day. We'll talk on Thursday. All right. More Vikings takeaways then.
All right. Peace out.
Later.
At Arif Hassan NFL on Twitter, ProFootballNetwork.com. Luke Inman, let's take it home from here, my man. I'm going to give you some more camp takeaways that I've got. You tell me whether you don't care a lot, or kind of care. We'll see how much you're overreacting about some of my notebook items. But first, make sure you're following along at SiriusXM, Locked On Sports Minnesota, and all of Locked On partnered with SiriusXM and the SXM app. Get all of our shows, Ron Johnson Show, Minnesota Sports Rank, a Minnesota Football Party, and all the hometown broadcasts. Corey Provis calling the Twins games. They're going to St. Louis right now, trying to get back on track against the Cardinals. Get that as well on the SXM app. Find us on YouTube, by the way, as well. Subscribe for free, also free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And comment below on YouTube, what do you think about the starting cornerback outlook? Jawan Williams, Caleb Evans, Byron Murphy Jr. right now for the Vikings. All right, Luke, I've got notes. Took them on Saturday. I do this every day. Tell me what you think about my observations. Jaren Hall threw 2 picks, and they weren't good either. They were not the kind of pick where you say, wow, great play by the defensive guy. They were the kind of picks where he's airmailing. I can't remember who it was. Threw it right to Mekhi Blackman. Then a really late throw. Najee Thompson undercut someone and picked it off. And I've seen a little bit of this from Jaren Hall already. He's not been accurate. He's not been on time. We're only 4 practices in, though. So do you kind of care? You care a lot? Or you're not sweating it. You don't care at all.
Anytime it comes to the quarterback position, especially a rookie that you drafted, used a 5th-round pick, I definitely care. I just think, once the dust settled after the draft, and then you see him throwing minicamp in shorts, and then even just watching this Netflix documentary, right, and realizing, man, even Kirk Cousins was swimming in this playbook as a 9-year veteran in the middle of the season. I think the expectations with Jaren Hall have been curbed, so to speak, as we've all slowly started to remember and realize that, all right, this was probably supposed to be just a redshirt year for him. Day 3 pick, 5th rounder, small school. He's in a perfect position, though, to sit back and learn behind 2 veterans and just absorb as much of the playbook and the verbiage as possible. I'll just say, I haven't seen many live reps myself, but I will say, the guy has got the media part of his game down, because anytime I've heard him speak to any of the reporters, he's like an 8-year veteran, Sam. I mean, he's got all the one-liners down, and he's saying and doing all the right things, even if it's not equating to good plays and production out on the field.
So you mentioned the great veteran presence of Jawan Williams, right? Jawan Williams, 25 years old. He turns 26 on December 6th. Jaren Hall, 25 years old.
Wow.
He turns 26 3 months after Jawan Williams. Just, man, I mean, they're at very different stages of their career, but they are basically the same age. Here's what else I have. Ivan Pace Jr. and Jaquelin Roy, 2 rookies regularly getting second team reps. What's your level of care about those 2 young guys really getting in the mix?
Well, listen, there's a lot of pressure on this draft class to come in and I get it. Even the day 3 picks, it's tough to expect too much and expect the world from these guys. And again, 4 practices in, pump the brakes a little bit. But after what we saw in the little production we got from last year's draft class, there is some pressure on some of these guys to come in and at least look the part and perform and not look lost and say, okay, there's something here to be working with. I think it was Steve Weish from NFL Network was out at camp.
Yes.
He was talking to Gabe Henderson. I think you can listen to the interview up on Viking.com. He said he talked to Flores for 30 minutes. And he said, all right, give me a few names that are really sticking out to you. He called out Ivan Pace Jr. specifically, Sam, as a guy who stuck out to him and really wowed him during not just the 4 practices, but going all the way back to rookie minicamp and OTAs and things like that. That's such great news to hear, because with any UDFA specifically, you never know what to get. You always got to curb your expectations a little bit. But you and I have always been on the Ivan Pace train. We've been so excited about his potential, and we understand why he went undrafted and was a UDFA. 5'11", 230 at most, smaller inside linebacker. Is he going to be able to handle the physical punishment in the NFL, especially knowing what Brian Flores asks from his inside linebackers to move downhill and to chew up space? To hear he's looking really good and already with the 2, Sam, knock on wood, that's a great sign for things to come for sure. And Jaquelin Roy, boy, I tell you what, you look at that D-line rotation, outside of your top 2, I mean, I'm not even willing to put Dean Laurie in that starting 3 yet. It's just a grab bag of rotation of guys that it feels like not only is it going to be a heavy rotation this year, you could see them keep maybe 6 of these names, but I think that 3rd spot, that 3rd rotation, outside of Tonga on 1st and 2nd down, and Harrison Phillips, your leader, I think these jobs are up for the taking right now. And to see Jaquelin Roy work with the 2nd team, you mentioned, I think you came back from OTAs and said you saw him with the 1s at some point in some portion of practice as well. That's a good sign for things to come for sure. I would say just this draft class as a whole, even though we've kind of picked on Jaron Hall a little bit, good things on this draft class as a whole so far, just in the early goings, knowing how much pressure Kwesi had to really produce from 2023 draft.
Yeah, I feel like it's come at the expense a little bit of Assezi. I haven't seen nearly as much Assezi as I thought I would. He's been a lot with the 3s, and Jaquelin seems to have leaped in front. But that is telling, though, Luke. Like if a rookie, and this applies to Pace as well, if you've got a rookie in place of some guys that have been here for a bit, that says something. That says something about what the coaches observed all spring, what they believe the player can be, putting him in a position now to sort of play, almost putting him in the position you expect him to finish at and letting him acclimate to that, which I think is a good sign for their future, 100%.
Let me just ask you just real quick, 10 seconds.
it.
Now that we're talking about the rookie class, have you seen anything or heard anything about Jay Ward, the nickel/safety from LSU, day 3 pick as well? I've heard a lot about all the other rookies, including UDFAs like Ivan Pace, obviously. Haven't heard a lick about Jay Ward. Doesn't mean that's a bad thing.
Yeah, he's buried right now. Okay. He's firmly with the 3s. I've seen almost nothing of him with the 2s. It's like Jay Ward and Theo Jackson will get thrown out there with the 3s. Like I said this in the spring, he looks really small to me. There's a difference between, there's lean small. Like Jay Ward is, he's not that tall, right? Like sometimes if you're tall and lean, you can get away with it, but he's kind of on the shorter side and he's lean. I think he's got to add some muscle, some weight. And the Vikings have said that as well. They'd like to see him gain about 10 pounds. And then,
so he's got to ball out on special teams. I mean, we've kind of given him a pass while we've done our final 53-man projections, our way too early ones anyways. Kind of just assumed, all right, Kwesi, youth movement, another, day 3 draft pick. We're giving him a pass, but he's really got to show something on special teams if he's expected to make this final 53.
Yeah. I think that he could definitely get that pass. I think that they don't want to give up on a 4th round pick or a 5th round pick just because he's too small as a rookie. Sometimes they'll just let guys kind of float on special teams for a year. But yes, he does. Matt Daniels needs to take to him and make sure he can be used in that way. That should fit his skill set. Like they talked about his physicality and his hitting ability in college. That should play well for him. And also, Luke, he's at a really deep position group. Who are you going to demote? Are you going to demote Scene? Probably not. Are you going to demote Metellus? Probably not. So it makes sense that he's stuck with the 3s at that safety spot. Maybe we'll see a little bit more of him and what he can do during joint practices and the games where we'll get a better idea.
You know what I'm really curious about here is just Josh Metellus has carved out this specific, unique role for Brian Flores, right? Kind of like a Joker package, right? That's a very specific role for a very specific skill set. If Josh Metellus goes down, right? All right, or needs a breather even just for a series or two, you got to have the next guy in line because I can't change my entire game plan, right? So much of my plays revolve around this specific position and this player. I wonder if that's a guy like they think can be Jay Ward at some point down the line.
That's interesting you say that, because you know who I've seen in that role is Theo Jackson.
Interesting. Okay.
I've seen Theo Jackson being the backup Metellus.
That's
and
good
no
to know.
One's talking about Theo Jackson. It is. Yeah. No one's talking about this guy.
Yeah.
I barely know who Theo Jackson is. But I've noticed that. That's actually a great question and something I observed, and kind of, my antenna went up, and he's got some size. He's 6'2", 200, went to Tennessee, 6th round pick of the Titans last year that the Vikings must have picked up on waivers. And I don't know if Jackson was ever active for the Vikings, but he was on the roster most of the year last year. So don't sleep on Theo Jackson.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Good call out for sure.
I was griping on Saturday, Luke. I was griping. You know what I was griping about?
What happened?
Matt Daniels gets up there and he says, we are in a kicking competition between Greg Joseph and Jack Podlesny. And I said, well, okay, when's the competition happening? Because you guys haven't kicked at all. I mean, how can you have a kicking competition if the guys are just, kicking against air on the practice field? You got to give these guys live bullets. You got to give them a long snapper. You got to give them like a real rush and like a field goal block team and see how they perform. You got to give them some pressure. They hadn't done any of that. Well, finally, Luke, they did it. They heard my gripes, and on Saturday, they sent the guys out, and they actually kicked 11 on 11. Greg Joseph, 6 out of 6. Jack Podlesny didn't get as many reps, 3 out of 3.
Okay.
Do you care about this kicking competition? Do you think it's legit? Or do you think this is just like kind of a ultimate like insurance policy? They're sticking with Joseph. Do you think this is a real competition that they're holding?
Yeah, I'm taking it with a grain of salt. It sounds like he's looked good out there at practice, obviously what you want, but I need to see a lot more before I come close to calling this an actual real competition, because in this league, in the NFL, when it comes to kickers specifically, unless you're in a rebuild mode and just looking to develop a guy with some high upside, it is so hard to justify letting any veteran go who's coming off a season where he helped you win so many close games and made so many huge kicks to help you close out games in the fourth quarter. I mean, you can go through the list one by one, game-winning kicks or go-ahead kicks in the final minutes. Saints game in London, 47-yarder. That's not a chip shot, 24 seconds left. In Washington, 12 seconds left to win it. 33-yarder in Buffalo the next week in overtime. Indy game, 40-yarder to complete the comeback, 3 seconds left. I'm missing one. 61-yarder versus the Giants as time expires. Yeah, should I keep going? I mean, I don't think I can actually keep going. I think that was all of them.
That was it.
You get it. Like, you can't put a price on the experience a guy like that has to bring to the table. So I'm taking it with a grain of salt. I think it's more about having a plan B, a backup option in case anything went wrong or he got hurt. I know Greg Joseph has... I mean, sure, compared to other positions, it's not going to blow you out of the water, but he's got a healthy enough amount of guaranteed money to make me think they prefer to keep him if it was a 50-50 coin flip, right? I think it's more about having an insurance policy in case something goes wrong with Greg Joseph. Now you can bring in a guy that is comfortable with your long snapper, with the holder, understands, just the whole entire, team facility and locker room, everything else, right? He's been there. You're not bringing up someone cold turkey off the street. That's what I think is really going on here, but we'll see. It remains to be seen. We'll see. That's not to say that things couldn't get a little bit more heated, I guess, as we get into, the real scrimmages coming up with the Titans and Cardinals, and then the actual preseason games as well. But right now, oh boy, heavy house money on Greg Joseph to win this so-called kicking battle.
Yeah, because again, I don't think they're starting from an even place. Right. I think that Greg Joseph would have to do a tremendous amount of tanking his own stock for this to become an even competition. So that probably means, like, if they have another field goal, session, he would probably have to go 2 of 6. Like, there would have to be some real meltdown stuff for him to get back on Jack Podlesny's level. Although I hear they call Jack Podlesny Hot Pod in his college circles. Hot Pod is what he was called at Georgia. And if we can have Hot Pod as our kicker, kind of like it.
If we can have Hot Pod on the pod, oh my God, Sam, worlds colliding. That'd be outstanding. Hey, I know we're kind of wrapping up. What's been like the coolest guy. I saw Chris Carter was out there, I think. Maybe Pat Williams. Every year's a little bit different, I know. Just some kind of fun light notes that you may have. Any other big names that you saw, talking to other people as well, and maybe just what you're looking forward to today now coming up, starting a new week of practice.
Yeah, pads on today, by the way. So the hitting ramps up. We'll see if Danielle is out there in pads. I guess I'd be a little surprised if just on his first day on the field, they put him in pads. I could see him maybe just doing individuals today and then sitting out the team portion. We'll see. Weather's not quite as bad or formidable this week, so maybe guys can jump right into it. But you mentioned big Pat Williams. Still looks like he could play, man. I mean, he looks like he could strap him on and he could play the Kyrie Tonga role. He could be the big body in there. A lot of these guys, and I don't think Pat looks out of shape at all. Like, he still looks fit, but he's still $3 bills. Like, I think some of these guys, they shed 100 pounds, right? I think he's still like a fit 300. Looked great, honestly. And Chris Carter, good to see him. Like, I think that's someone who is such a good ambassador for the team. And when you get a new receiver coming in here, Jordan Addison, who's already made a pretty big misstep, to have Carter around just as a touch point. And for those two to connect, I think is so important. Huge. And I love seeing Jefferson and Carter's relationship where it's at, because some guys might have jealousy, right, about their place in like Vikings lore. Like, oh, this guy thinks he's going to be the best receiver in team history. Come on, look what I did. Right. But I think Chris is already like ready to step over for it. Like everything he said, he's very, very welcoming of what Justin Jefferson means. So I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah. What did he say when you mentioned, hey, you ended up getting the fourth and final spot on our Locked On Sports Minnesota Vikings Mount Rushmore? What was his reaction there in real time?
He said, oh, you should have gone with John Randall. No, actually, he said he should have gone with AP. And then I said, well, Chris, he's not part of the Ring of Honor yet. And he said, oh, that's stupid.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I got the list pulled up today. They have these legends autographs. So some cool big names coming out. Gene Washington, John Henderson, Oscar Pumpkin Seed Reed. Remember on the Rankum Show, we did top 5 Vikings running backs not named Dalvin last week. Go check that episode out if you haven't already. Oscar Pumpkin Seed Reed in my honorable mentions. Titans joint practice will be here before you know it. And I know we're still, technically 16 days out on the calendar schedule, but it's going to fly by and it's going to go quick. And they're going to have to start trimming some things down here before you know it. And things are going to start looking real and getting intense when it comes to these battles. So pads put on today. Things are, I expect, going to ramp up quite a bit today and this week as you're out there at TCO.
100%. And my last observation, it's the funniest contrast between Rick Spielman, the GM, and Kwesi, the GM. Do you remember Rick, the Rick position? He was like the high safety, right now. High safety, 40 yards behind the line of scrimmage, middle of the field. Like, let's see the stance. You got the stance? Yep. Hands behind, back. Yep. Notepad, pen. Just laser focused, jotting stuff down. There's a missed assignment by Jay Ward.
I'm going to have to call his agent later today. Okay. Yeah.
Now the Kwesi stance, it's flip-flops. It's always flip-flops.
Is it really? Okay.
He rolls out usually late to practice too. He doesn't want to watch warm-ups. Rolls out late, stands on the sideline in flip-flops. He's usually got a football in his hands. He's flipping it up.
Love it.
He's practicing his grip. I don't know if he's taking notes or not. Maybe it's just mental notes, but it is such a vibe.
I love it, man.
You would never know he was the GM.
I know KOC was getting interviewed when NFL Network was there, and he was like, yeah, they have me throw a couple passes, and they always rip on me. I'm not very good anymore. Have you actually seen KOC throwing some guys, some passes, and actually getting out there and running some routes with these guys?
Oh, I feel like I saw it last year once. I can't remember. Okay. Maybe I don't get there early enough. I mean, I'm guilty of showing up late like Kwesi too. I don't want to always watch these guys stretch, but
They were making fun. He said, you know what? These guys make fun of me. They say my spiral isn't as tight as it used to be, basically. So he's losing a little bit. But I didn't know if that was out, in the open for people to see. I would love to see how much zip on the ball KOC still has on a 15-yard out route on the hashes, on the far hash, Sam. I'd love to see it.
I'd like to see him coaching up this Jaron Hall kid, right? Jaron's got, he needs a quarterback in his life to show him how to throw a spiral. That's all for today on the Minnesota Football Party. Luke and I back tomorrow talking more Vikings training camp impressions, maybe from a Danielle Hunter press conference and potentially a Danielle Hunter practice as well. At Luke_Spinman, find him on Twitter. I'm at Sam Ekstrom, also part of the Ron Johnson Show and Minnesota Sports Rankem. Subscribe on YouTube. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. And tune in every day for Minnesota Vikings training camp updates. That's all for now on Locked On Sports Minnesota.